am ecstatic for today. I am sharing a client case with you who did 3 separate stool tests on the exact same day: GI Map, GI Effects from Genova, and Tiny Health Co. Let's get into it. First, let's talk about the client. I have details over here, so I'm going to make terrible eye contact for a minute, but I want to make sure that you have the full picture. So this client came to me after years, decades even, of gut issues that were kind of low level, kind of got better, then kind of got worse, and now they're worse again. Biggest complaint is fatigue. And not just sometimes I'm tired, but fatigue that was impacting their life. This person is also a supplement junkie, so went down a lot of rabbit holes with a lot of different protocols and just never really felt the best. Alternating constipation and diarrhea a couple times a week, certain foods causing gas and really affect mood, including chicken recently, incomplete evacuation, so really not being able to empty the bowels all the way, and no rhyme or reason, not really complaining of bloating, which is very atypical for those other symptoms. Generally, I would expect to see significant bloating. Not really something they were struggling with. History of hemorrhoids, 20 years ago they went away, had some banding done 3 years ago as well, but generally lived their life with constipation, which again, now alternating to diarrhea. But the fatigue was a biggie, the gas was a biggie as well. And now these new food sensitivities were really bumming them out. They'd played around with digestive enzymes a little bit, but generally just starting to eat less as well because it was causing so much discomfort. So that gives you a snapshot of the client. Now I'm going to walk you through each test and significant findings, and you are going to see just how different each of these tests say that this client is doing in terms of their gut health. And then we'll talk about bringing it all together at the end and what I really felt like was going on for this client. So first up is GI Map. And honestly, GI Map is probably the most used that I see in the functional medicine circles that I'm in. It has been my primary stool test that I have used in years past. The more that I do side-by-side testing, the more I honestly really get away from GI Map. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's look through and see what these results say. I'm going to assume that you know how to interpret GI Maps. So this is not a tutorial on how to interpret them. This is just a high level what I see and how I would interpret it. First page looks clear. The second page shows H. pylori a little bit elevated. Now, here's the thing. Anytime I see H. pylori elevated on a GI map, I honestly do not trust it, especially if it doesn't match up with this client's symptoms. So does this client have symptoms of H. pylori? No. He does not. And I know a lot of practitioners say, well, it could be that he has low stomach acid because of the H. pylori, and that's why he's having these food aversions. I'm telling you, I really disbelieve this. I've had a lot of clients get secondary testing for H. pylori, and it comes back negative on all of the gold standard tests. GI Map will always overestimate H. pylori. I have seen it over and over again. Very rarely do I see a true H. pylori case when GI Map showed it elevated. Kind of on the higher side of all the commensals, Enterobacter, quite elevated, and all of the rest of them on the high side. Same thing in general. There's a lot of bacteria in the gut. In terms of the overgrowth, staph and strep, I see elevated in, 90% of the samples that GI Map spits out. But overall, not too crazy. I always look at this methanogen family over here, and it's not super high, but it's not super low. And so that's always going to contribute to that slowed motility as well. I don't love for a ton of things to be overgrown here. And you can see Klebsiella is present, not necessarily overgrown. Enterobacter, definitely overgrown. Whenever I see all of these present in pretty high amounts, I understand it's not overgrown, but remember, these are the really inflammatory ones that can cause a lot of circulating LPS. So even if they're not high, it's a pattern that I definitely look at. Candida is quite elevated as well. Does he have symptoms of Candida? Maybe potentially. I also see Candida elevated on GI Maps often where a secondary test rules it out. So H. pylori and Candida, when I see them elevated on a GI Map, I always have a question mark in the back of my head of, is that actually true? Because I see it come back often. Then on the final page, there's no parasites present, no worms. That all looks fine. Elastase looks appropriate. Secretory IgA low. That could be for a lot of reasons. It could also just be the samples. I've also seen samples that are tested a couple days apart, and one secretory IgA can be completely in the toilet, and the next stool sample, it's really high. And calprotectin also 11, so not too bad. Big picture for GI Map, if I didn't run any other tests, I would be thinking generally there's a lot of bacteria. So what are they there for? What are they trying to kind of counteract? I would be questioning, do they potentially have H. pylori? Do they have Candida? And they do have some inflammatory species that are a bit high. Secretory IgA low. Those are main thoughts for GI Map. Let's move to the next one. Next is Genova GI effects. This is the 3-day stool test as well. So this is a hefty guy. You would think that a 3-day stool test would show us the most accurate results, that it would be, something to really look at. Now, here's the thing. On first glance, take a look at this gut. It looks beautiful. This doesn't look like the gut that we saw before in the GI map. It looks pretty awesome. 0, 0, 1, 2, 0. Looks pretty good. It doesn't look like there's much here to fix. So let's take a deeper look. Again, I'm not going to teach you how to do these tests, but just kind of a high level what we're looking at. So you can see, whoa, looks like their gut is very healthy. That's weird. That's not what the GI map showed. Same thing here. Looks pretty good. Triglycerides low, but it looks like, the level of fat is appropriate. Pancreatic elastase looks good. That's what the GI map showed as well. Nothing too concerning there. Short chain fatty acids could be better. Butyrate could be better. Propionate percentage is pretty darn high. So, okay, maybe there's something there that we can optimize with the short chain fatty acids. And here, everything looks to be pretty okay. Again, we're not looking for everything to be perfect here. We're just generally looking at trends to see, does anything really stick out to us? And you can see here, lactobacilli, we've got bifidobacterium. Everything looks pretty okay. You can see Klebsiella was overgrown, but they're calling it non-pathogenic. And I think, if I remember right, Klebsiella, yes, on the GI map, Klebsiella was present as well. So that may be something, when I was looking through these, I was like, okay, so that tracks. You can see Candida there, but barely there. So is it a concern? I don't know. All of this was clear and all of that looked fine. So big picture for Genova GI effects is your gut's looking pretty darn good. Maybe we want to optimize short chain fatty acids, but other than that, everything looks awesome. So you can see, even just from those two tests, how different your treatment approach would be. One is, I guess we can just work on short chain fatty acids. The other is we have to go after H. pylori, we have to go after the Candida, we have to go after the Enterobacter, and we need to get your secretory IgA up. Something's wrong with your immune system. Do you see how two stool tests from the same stool sample are telling us a very different story? Well, it gets worse. Let's move on to Tiny Health Co. Honestly, looking at Tiny Health Co., I'm like, whoa, what's going on with your gut? So remember, we just looked at GI effects and it said, your gut looks awesome. Does this look like an awesome gut? Eek. Lowest 20 percentile in terms of the health of the microbiome. Very different story. You can see here, there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to breeze past this part too. Tiny Health Co. is a test that most people are not familiar with. So if this all looks overwhelming, it's because, well, it can get overwhelming if you don't know what you're looking at. So big findings here, bifidobacterium is 0.027% of the gut. Bifidobacteria should be 2 to 5% of the gut. That's a huge problem. Akkermansia, 0.027% of the gut. Eek. Akkermansia should take up 1 to 5% of the gut microbiome. Faecalibacterium, 8.494. Okay, that doesn't look too bad, but Faecalibacterium should be taking up 10 to 15% of the gut. And you can see here on this Enterobacter family, remember on the GI map, that came back really elevated. Well, we can see here like, ooh, holy smokes, 35% of their microbiome is this type of pathogen. That is really problematic. You can see E. coli is taking up 25%. Eek. Remember Klebsiella showed up overgrown on the GI map? We're seeing it again here as well. So again, this E. coli though coming up at 25%. To put this into perspective, E. coli should be making up 0.2% of the gut. That is very problematic. Salmonella coming back, yeah, we really don't want any of that, but that's honestly probably passing through. So then as we go through, you can see there's just a lot of pathogenic overgrowth. And yes, 0.008% doesn't sound crazy, but it should be lower. And when you have all of these pathogens that are just a little bit overgrown, it creates a really big issue with higher circulating lipopolysaccharide, which means higher inflammation. But guess what? Tiny Health Co. actually tests this. So let's look at the LPS index. But before we do, what's this? H. pylori 0%? That's weird. Candida 0%. That's weird too, isn't it? So we have two different tests showing us completely different things. Well, really 3 different tests showing us completely different things. All right, so on this page, it's looking for more of this gut inflammation, and yikes, wouldn't you know it? There's a lot of inflammation going on in the gut. So the mucus degradation index is showing us that there is a lot of damage to the mucosal barrier. Really problematic because the mucosal barrier is so needed for an optimized gut. And then for the LPS index, remember what I said a second ago, that higher count, even if it's a lot of different types of bad bacteria or negative bacteria are slightly overgrown, that creates a big problem. If a lot of them are a little bit overgrown, the burden on the body specifically for that LPS is going to be really significant. And we see that showing up here in a massive way. This is a really high score, meaning that lipopolysaccharide is a huge driver to his inflammation and to his gut issues. Hydrogen sulfide index, same thing. So a lot of hydrogen sulfide being produced. And doesn't that match his symptoms? Because gas production is one of his main complaints. And before we go any further, I have a question for you. What popular trendy diet do you think this client was on years ago? Any guesses? The carnivore diet. Of course, the carnivore diet. You can see that all of those negative bacteria were able to overgrow, and it's going to create this environment where those hydrogen sulfide producers can overgrow, which is going to lead to more hydrogen sulfide gas being produced. So this is when clients will say to me, I have a lot of gas and it smells like rotten eggs. Well, that is a sulfur smell, and it's a pretty good slam dunk that hydrogen sulfide might be at play here. There's more to this story. We're going to bring back this carnivore thing in just a minute. But you can see here, butyrate not looking so hot. On the last test on the GI effects, we did see that maybe the short chain fatty acids could use some optimization, but butyrate was fine on the last test and acetate was a little bit higher in terms of percentage. So you can see, again, a huge discrepancy. All right, so in terms of fiber digestion, that looks reasonable. Cellulose is in there, but looks reasonable. This is what I want to draw your attention to. Notice this protein breakdown capacity. Yikes. Remember I said that this client was on carnivore diet years ago. Since then has really had an optimized diet, trying to incorporate more plants and not just exclusively eating meat and butter. But you can see this is a huge problem. So this shows us that there is a lot of protein putrefaction in the gut, meaning the fermentation of protein. Because on the carnivore diet, the types of bacteria that overgrow are the types that ferment protein, because guess what? That was their only food source. So of course they're going to overgrow. And they're going to be really hard to get rid of once you go off of carnivore and start eating plants again. Notice, remember at the very beginning of this test, good bacteria, commensals, were decreased, and all of the gram-negative, highly inflammatory bacteria were overgrown. They're overgrown because that's the food they were being given. And now we're seeing this still because that bacteria was never knocked down, because it was never brought back into balance. Every time that this client eats protein, which of course they are pushing because they're in the gym trying to preserve muscle mass, their gut bacteria are fermenting it and creating hydrogen sulfide gas, which is then causing all of these unpleasant symptoms. But not only that, those higher counts of negative bacteria, the increased circulation of lipopolysaccharides is causing a lot of inflammation in the gut. So it's adding insult to injury. So again, we can just see, in the gut, there is one particular bacteria that's making up 25% of the gut, and that is really problematic. That is not balanced. And here, again, just zooming out really quick. So proteobacteria, this is where a lot of those harmful bacteria are showing up. This is the big umbrella where all of those negative bacteria are underneath, is taking up nearly 36% of this client's gut, and ideal is less than 4%. So you can see with Tiny Health Co., you get data in a way that you don't get from the other tests. And I am not being paid by Tiny Health Co. I have no stock in Tiny Health Co. I make no money off of saying that Tiny Health Co. can be really beneficial, but I hope that you can see that we can see a much bigger picture with shotgun sequencing, like in the Tiny Health Co. test. So in the GI map, perhaps we saw this bacteria is a little bit overgrown, that bacteria is a little bit overgrown, but you don't see percentages. And when you see percentages in this way, you can say, okay, holy smokes, this is a huge problem. So not only do we have Klebsiella and we have Enterobacter that's potentially overgrown, but no, these negative bacteria all added together are taking up 35% of the gut, and it should be 4%. That is where the problem lies. You can also see how everything that we saw in this Tiny Health Co. test really matches up to the client's symptoms in a really beautiful way. So you can see that it all makes sense. Whereas some of the other tests, it didn't really add up. What we move forward with is we're actually going to cool it on the protein a little bit. So if you have so many bacteria in the gut that are thriving on high protein, we have to knock down that growth. So we have some strategic supplements, but also adapting the diet to stop feeding those negative bacteria and really start allowing those good bacteria to thrive. I genuinely hope that you found this as fascinating as me. I think as functional practitioners, we put too much stock in testing, and we all have our favorite tests that we use, but you may not understand the limitations of the test, which can lead to false diagnoses for clients, expensive supplement routines, and the frustration on their end when it's not working. And maybe it's not working because the test that you're using is inaccurate. I am not claiming that Tiny Health Co. is the end-all be-all, but I can tell you that when I have started incorporating it into my practice, I have seen connections like I've never seen before. And this side-by-side testing is really illuminating because I can see what's showing up in a massive way on one test that really isn't showing up in the other. It's important to not rely so heavily on this functional medicine testing. Honestly, when I started out, every single client got about $1,000 worth of labs up front before I even met with them because I felt like that's what I needed to do to get a full picture. Well, then I realized, do I even need this? I started testing this theory and I started working with clients without any testing to see, okay, what do I understand about this client's history? What do I understand about their symptoms? And what do I feel like is going to lead to healing? Because there are foundational things that you can start with. And I've done this for so long that I have a really good idea of what might be driving client symptoms. Then I use testing only if we get stuck, because testing can be helpful, but are you wasting a lot of the client's funds on testing when you probably would have started with the same protocol to begin with? The other thing is these tests are not 100% accurate. It is still a new technology. So again, can they be used? They be helpful? Absolutely. But do not use it as a crutch and say, okay, so this said H. pylori and it said Candida, so I'm going to do those protocols. And then if they don't work, you're stuck because you can't think outside of the box. You can't see that maybe what you initially diagnosed was incorrect. And then the client has kind of lost trust and faith in you, and it adds a lot of stress to you as well. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know. And if you have missed the news, I have opened up a brand new mentorship opportunity that's multi-parts. Number one, you can hire me to look at a case with you. So I can give you some direction on what I would do and what I would recommend. I also have just a slightly higher touch mentorship program where I will not only give you some oversight for the case, but I will help you develop personalized protocols and be with you for support for the duration of that case. So it's kind of like on-the-job training. And then finally, I just announced the opening of my one-on-one mentorship program. I'm accepting 3, maybe 4 practitioners into this program, which is going to be insanely high touch. I am going to show you my exact protocols, but also the biggest thing is my clinical reasoning with client cases. So I'm not just going to hand you a protocol about SIBO or talk to you about what I do for constipation. No, that's not helpful. I'm going to walk you through exactly why I would do this, exactly why I didn't do this, and I'm going to show you exactly how I achieve a 95% success rate in helping my clients reverse their IBS-like symptoms. And if you're not a practitioner and you are a potential client and you find this fascinating and you are struggling with gut issues, I would love to work with you one-on-one. You can visit my website for more, or of course, follow me on Instagram at Dietitian Brittany.